We are all running around with very reactive nervous systems for the most part, right? And I think the general, even societal conversation about all the things to be afraid of, even our marketing techniques are all fear of missing out, fear of losing out, fear of not being enough of something.
We often talk about how your emotions are contagious, right? So what do you want people to catch from you?
I think there's this whole part of like, okay, what resources can I leverage in the moment that might be happening?
Welcome to the Spirituality in Leadership podcast. I'm Andrew Cohn. Spirituality in Leadership is a platform for conversations with leaders at all levels about bringing our spiritual dimensions to our leadership, our teams, our workplaces, and all areas of our lives in order to achieve greater success and fulfillment and build and sustain healthier organizations. If you'd like to connect with me to talk further about these topics and or about individual or team coaching, leadership workshops, or team alignment, please go to my website, lighthouseteams.com. Enjoy the podcast.
Welcome back to the Spirituality in Leadership podcast. And I'm really pleased to have my friend and colleague, Kimberly Arnold, on with us today. Kimberly and I met, I think it was about 8 years ago at the Wisdom 2.0 conference in San Francisco, which is a fascinating community. I invite you to check it out. And well, Kimberly, let me allow you to introduce yourself just a little bit.
Thank you, Andrew. Yes, I remember that day. I think we even had a conversation about Aikido, is what I recall. And so I spent over 30 years in a variety of corporate roles, from being a practice leader at professional services firm, PwC, an innovation leader in healthcare, and then a global healthcare industry leader at Salesforce. And in the course of that success, I will say I lost both of my parents. I definitely let the stress of work impact my health. And, I am human. And there were times that I had some reactive responses that maybe weren't so skillful. And so about 15 years ago, I really dove in to somatic practices. And I had really the honor to study with world-renowned teachers in Tai Chi and Feldenkrais and
Aikido, as I recall.
And Aikido, yes, 100%. That was probably my primary one. And so what I'm doing now is I've founded a new group that's focused on somatic leadership. And really, it's about how do we blend what we know already of how to be an effective leader, but really now bringing our body in as an ally in the process.
There's so much to talk about with what you're saying, and we'll do our best to keep this to a manageable size conversation. And I think when we met in 2015, you were still at Salesforce. And by the way, it's fascinating your background, because the different environments between a professional services firm, then Blue Shield, which is private, but not as private as, say, for example, Salesforce is, and 3 different cultures, I would imagine, as well, and maybe ways of working. And I look forward to hearing more about that. And yeah, you just have a lot to share in terms of what works and how it can work. And you have stories to tell as well. I've heard you share them, and I look forward to you sharing some more here. And as you know, this podcast is about the intersection of these deep spiritual components of human beings and the business world, where my hypothesis is we need these dimensions more than ever. So we're talking about what are those dimensions? How do they play out at work? How have we seen them be successful? How can we promote a healthy conversation without dogma and separation or judgment or fear, but to be practical in terms of what we're doing? And I think my sense is that your wisdom is full of that. So if I could start or restart the conversation after this little preamble, talking about, for you, what does it mean for you to consider spiritual dimensions and how those spiritual dimensions come into the workplace?
Yeah, it's to your point, Andrew, it's a big question. But I think you pointed to a really critical part of what's happening today, right? We are all running around with very reactive nervous systems for the most part. Right. And I think the general, even societal conversation about all the things to be afraid of, even our marketing techniques are all fear of missing out, fear of losing out, fear of not being enough of something. And what that does collectively is create constriction in the body. And so a lot of the ways that I'll say I kind of blend what's happening is through somatics, finding ways to help kind of regulate the nervous system, move from contraction to sort of an open state of being. From that state of being is where I think we actually have access to, I'll say, the spiritual realm. From that state of being is where I can actually connect with, I'll say, the wisdom of the trees, or Or there have been many times when I was in a challenging spot and I will think to myself, what if I were going to be like water? What might that be like? What are ways that I can? So I will often look to nature, I'll say, as an inspiration for how to sort of get, for me, fundamentally, I'll say spirituality is shifting from a consciousness that is bigger and deeper and broader than my own.
Beautiful.
Moving from the place of me and ego to the state of we and the collective group body.
Beautiful. Great practical working definition. Love it. Good.
So the ways that I saw that play out in business were really fascinating, right? We were talking before about how you can come into a meeting space, and if somebody's coming into that room agitated, that energy is going to almost spread like wildfire through the space, right? And particularly if you're the leader and you're coming in agitated, that's pretty much setting the tone.
We often talk about how your emotions are contagious, right? So what do you want people to catch from you? It's right. A little bit of a cliche, but it's true. But please continue.
Yeah. Well, so I think there's this whole part of like, okay, what resources can I leverage in the moment that might be happening, right? And so I'll share a story about how I saw this play out once in one of my roles, actually at Salesforce. And in my first role there, I was in a position to be supporting pretty high profile global customers. And I was their first line of support if anything went wrong. And so it was a typical day. I walk into the client's lunchroom, and in a matter of minutes, I get a text, a phone call, and somebody personally comes up to me and says, "We need you upstairs immediately." And they have me take my lunch. I show up in a conference room where there's 10 leaders sitting at a table looking very distressed. We had just put out a pre-release, and they had 8 issues that were business stopping issues happening in the software. And so I can say in that moment, I got to practice one of my practices, which is grounding and centering. Right? In the moment that I'm under high stress, for any of us, what we kind of know is under that stress point, we don't rise to our expectation, we fall to our level of training. And from the Aikido practice, really inspired by Wendy Palmer, she has this practice throughout the day, how to ground and center. So I really took a moment and I took an inhale, imagined clouds in between the vertebrae of my spine, and exhale, and just imagine that all the stress was rolling off down my front, relaxing my chest, shoulders, and belly. Then I really looked to broaden my perspective and take in the room and be like, okay, what's happening here?
And by the way, even as you described that grounding and centering, I feel the energy shift in this conversation because you're bringing that forward here. So thank you for that. Please continue.
Yeah, exactly. So really, I went from there to, okay, now I need to broaden my perspective, right? Under a moment of stress, we tend to put our attention on the stress point, the thing that's coming in to hit us. So at that moment, I literally was like broadening my chest. When I'm sitting with people in a room, you can do it by even, putting your shoulders in the back of the chair, whatever it is, but there's something to just go, how can I now open to really hear what's happening? So we did that. We heard all the issues. I'll fast forward ahead to say, even though we then got them, connected with customer support, we got those things resolved. They were related to changes that the customer had made on their side. But regardless of that incident had their global internal audit come back to our head of quality assurance and say, we've got a dozen issues that we want you to look at. And we would have internal audits happening all the time. So that wasn't that big a deal. But this was a really contentious one. And so they were going to come into a face-to-face to work through these issues. And candidly, both sides said, that guy is a jerk. That guy's a jerk. I don't think this is going to go well. There was really confrontational energy coming in. And so I was the person hosting the day. And what I was aware of was, again, when we're under stress, if I came in concerned about that confrontation, that was going to set the energy tone. And so I went through my grounding practices. I went through the space, but then I also really thought about, and this also kind of comes from my Aikido practice from Wendy, of what are the qualities that I actually want to have in this space for this conversation? What will actually make this work? And so I really spent time actually physically in the room where they were going to meet and was just imagining, understanding, connection, and collaboration.
So that was before they came into the room. You were in the room and you were visualizing ahead what's going to be helpful in this situation.
That's right.
Okay, cool.
And literally, I wasn't really managing the conversation that day. There was a clear agenda. They were going to go back and forth, but I was really there just holding the energetics of what was happening. And while they both came in like, this is going to be a nightmare, we actually had a collaborative day. And beyond that, about 2 years later, those two leaders, so the head of internal audit and the head of quality assurance, co-presented at our annual customer conference and shared about how the learning that they had with each other not only created a stronger partnership, but created stronger operations on both sides.
Great example of healthy, constructive conflict that didn't deteriorate into some nasty, negative, destructive swirl. And yeah, wonderful. Interesting. And these were the two people who are that guy's a jerk and that guy's a jerk.
That's right.
Right. And when I hear you describing what you did and how you did it and the impact, is that it's very practical. It's very physical. There's a physical dimension to this. That's the somatic piece. Somatic is body, correct?
Yep.
The soma, right? So very practical, very physical, tangible, what you've done. And at the same time, it's aspirational. That's my word. I see it as aspirational. I see it as visioning. It's intangible. You're talking about clouds and vertebrae. You're talking about the energy of the space. These are intangible things, yet very practical and very helpful.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think, and how many times, I can raise my hand and go, how many times was I used to call them OSMs, the oh shit moments, right? Mm-hmm. And so the part back to sort of the conversation of spirituality, the way that I know how to access those things is because I've made it my practice to practice them, right? Mm-hmm. There were plenty of times when it wasn't my default to ground and center, to raise my gaze, I had the sweaty palms and the shallow breathing, just like any of us would. And so, I don't know if you've heard of, if you're familiar with atomic habits.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And so I've been really following that to kind of refine my morning practices. So, all those things that you go, I know it would be good if I did this thing. I've been really following his, sort of habit stacking to get it all in. And it does make it easier.
Well, and you're turning I've heard Rick Hansen talk about this as turning from traits to states, from states to traits. I apologize, from states to traits, to sort of like repaving some of these neural pathways and habituating some of these great behaviors. That's wonderful. And the way you're describing this is super practical, super helpful, and they come from this deeper spiritual place, as we would define it. Some other people would say, well, I don't think about this as spiritual. And as I always say, okay, call it whatever you want. The fact is, we're meeting at this watering hole called business meetings and business interactions. And how are we engaging with one another, and what results do I get? So it sounds like you've, with these practices on shifting the dynamics, you're able to really bring forward some of these qualities for the benefit of whomever you're serving at the time.
And that's what I'm doing now, is really working with leaders and teams to know how to make those shifts. So I recently was invited into facilitation of 3 C-suite folks and their 3 key investors who were at a huge point of conflict. And, what was there was an opportunity to really help them all listen more deeply to what they were committed to, what their shared values were. And so one of the ways that we brought that in when we started the day, because we met together it ended up being under an oak tree, sitting outside. We wanted the spaciousness, but I started with a pile of rocks in the middle of the space, and I knew everybody was coming in. I did pre-meetings with everyone, so I knew there was a lot of contention coming in. And I had given them a prompt ahead of time of like, how do you want to show up today, and what might get in the way?
Beautiful.
And so prior to us starting, I had them each take a rock and go walk around the space and just lay down with the rock, whatever it is that might have gotten in the way, letting it go and coming back to start the day.
Mm-hmm.
Definitely shifted the energy.
Right. Did they share about what that was and what they were putting down and leaving behind? I'm curious.
We didn't explicitly ask them to. What I would say is that the contentions were visible enough that it probably would have been pretty obvious what that was. So where we actually then focused next, and they also had gotten this as a prompt, of what value were they bringing in for the day that they were going to hold for themselves and for the team. And so then they did openly share, this is the value that I'm holding that we're going to carry together.
Beautiful. And was there commonality in those values? Or maybe there was at the end of the day. Was there at the beginning of the day?
Well, what happened was everybody had a unique one, but they were very complementary.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. So that was a big part of, I'll say again, for me, I sort of bring the blending of these practices to shift the energy of the container and the space that you're going to engage inside of. And so that was the beginning of the day. 6 hours later, we walked away with, a plan and things to do next. And I'm happy to say that group is moving forward much more collaboratively now than they were at the time. Yeah.
Nice. Beautiful. And you've been through different leadership roles, some senior leadership roles at PwC and then at Blue Shield and then at Salesforce. And I'm curious to know, I'm putting you on the spot a little bit, but I know you can handle it. What would you offer to your younger self as a high-level leader in those environments to bring in some of your awareness that you have today? Because you're coming at it today, I'm observing anyway from some different level of consciousness that's super helpful and very practical and very rooted and anchored. And what would you say to yourself as, for example, you're a practice leader at PwC? What advice would you have for yourself? How would you hold yourself and advise yourself?
Yeah, it's a gorgeous question. Believe you me, I've rethought that so many times.
Well, not from a space of regret, but from a space of just wisdom.
This is what would be available, right? What I know is that if I feel like I need to move or speak with urgency, it's the time to pause.
Which is counterintuitive, right? Our nervous system, or we're being driven, we're reactive, we're moving now. We got to go now. And that's the time we need to pause.
That's right.
Talk about a practice. Beautiful.
Yeah. And so it's really just like at the moment that I think, I got to pick up the phone. I got to something. You could really just take one breath, inhale to the count of 4, pause for a moment, exhale to the count of 5 or 6. If you do that for an entire minute, it will actually help clear the cortisol or stress hormone from your system, right? Because the cortisol or stress hormone takes the blood from your brain, puts it into your big muscles and says, get ready to run. So if you can clear that, you can start to get the blood back to your brain, have more access to strategic thinking, broader perspective. It's really shifting from that point of like anxiety and urgency to thoughtfulness and possibility.
So basically, we can redirect what our brains are telling us to do.
And it's faster to do it through the body. Like really, Wendy used to always say, the body always wins. So a lot of what we explore in, sort of somatic coaching and facilitation with groups is really noticing that our thoughts are going, the emotions are going, and the body's doing something else. I mean, how many times were you ever in a meeting and somebody says something that didn't go over well and everyone's immediately like looking down, right? Like immediately, like everybody's bodies go. And so if that moment, put the clouds between your vertebrae, reach out, stretch, broaden the perspective, there's more available.
And what I hear you describing is, well, with the example with these he's a jerk, is you're shifting the dynamic within the room. And as I hear you talk about take the deep breaths, inhale to 4, exhale to 6, hopefully for a full minute, you're shifting the dynamics, but those are the internal dynamics, right? Thereby influencing the external dynamics. So I love how you describe that very practically. And I know that you describe yourself as a transformation strategist, and these are transformation strategies. So thank you for giving us some golden nuggets, even in a short amount of time. Yeah, that's exactly what this is.
That's right. Well, and I know at one point you had asked me a question of like, what's one practical tip that people could sort of take away for their day? So I want to share with you one of my daily practices that has really it's been way more potent than I thought it would be. And that is, I actually keep this cup by my bed. And in the morning, it's like this. And in the morning, I turn it up. And I just take a moment and I consider, what is it that I'm welcoming into my day? And so it may be the qualities that I want to bring into the day. It may be something that I'm looking to achieve for the day, an outcome that I want to create, an intention that I have, whatever that is. I leave the cup sitting up all day long. And right before I turn out the light at night, I take a moment, I offer gratitude, I reflect on the day. How did it go? What worked? What would be even better? And then in order to turn off my brain, I pour it out. I put it back face down and sleep.
Beautiful. And this day is done. And I no longer need to carry anything from this day. It is out.
Let it go.
Lovely. Beautiful. Thank you so much for that. I love that. And perhaps this would be a good place to close this part of our conversation. Maybe we'll pick this up at another time.
There's one thing.
Please.
there's one exciting thing I want to share. So as one of the commitments that I have is that I really want to encourage us collectively to have a conversation about the power of the body and having it be our ally. And so I started a weekly series on LinkedIn. I just do a small video posting every Monday. It's called Microshift Monday. And it'll be a sample of one of these practices and really just an invitation to try it on, see how it's going. I'll have different folks present practices each week. But I just want to help us really have a collective conversation of the wisdom in the body and how we can bring that wisdom into leadership.
Beautiful. And there's so many practical applications for this, like you're outlining. I could see the Microshift Monday developing into a community and a community of sharing best practices and otherwise. What a beautiful initiative. That's great. I look forward to checking it out, which should be right around the time we drop this podcast.
That's great. Awesome.
Great.
Well, thank you so much for the opportunity, Andrew.
Beautiful. Thank you. And wow, I just look forward to continuing the conversation. And I have known some of what you've been working on. And I love this conversation because in addition to educating whoever may be listening to this and inspiring as it has me, I just get to know you better and learn more about what you're doing. And I'm grateful. Thank you.
Thank you. Have a good one.
Thanks, Kimberly.
Thank you for listening to Spirituality in Leadership. If you want to access this wealth of knowledge and insight on a regular basis, please subscribe to the show. Join the network of leaders who want to do and be better. You can go to the site spiritualityinleadership.com or your preferred podcast platform to catch all the episodes and learn more. Until next time, take good care of yourself.